This is breaking news.
Good afternoon. I'm Dick Brennan. We enter our programming with breaking news. Former Senator Bob Menendez has just been sentenced on federal corruption charges. The New Jersey politician sentenced to 11 years in prison. Back in July, the 71-year-old was found guilty of accepting lavish bribes, including cash and gold bars, in exchange for using his political influence to act as a foreign agent. We want to go right now to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. That's where Christine Sloan is live with the latest. Christine.
Dick, that's right. 11 years behind bars. Anything above 10 years keeps him out of a minimum security prison. Of course, his attorneys have said they're going to appeal this case. Our Alice Gaynor has been in court this entire time. She tells us that former Senator Menendez addressed the judge crying the entire time, at one point saying, quote, "I have lost everything that I ever cared for," adding that, quote, "every day that he's awake is a punch." The judge telling him that he took no pleasure in the sentence, saying that the crimes that the former senator is accused of and was convicted of were striking. One of them acting as a foreign agent for the government of Egypt. So the former senator is now inside the federal court as we speak. He came into court earlier today. He said very little. Sources tell me that this entire time, this past year, since he was convicted last summer, he's been praying a lot and spending a lot of time with his family, his son, who is U.S. Congressman Robert Menendez Jr., his daughter, a TV personality, and that he's been spending time with his grandchildren. So at this point, we're expecting Menendez to come out here and address reporters. He did not want to speak earlier today because this was obviously a very important day for him. Now, the 71-year-old who once wore a bulletproof vest to testify against the mayor of Union City back in the 1980s, now facing the stark reality of spending the next decade behind bars. He is 71 years old. So much happening as we speak. Now, the two businessmen who were convicted of bribing Menendez with cash and gold bars, they also received their sentences earlier this morning. Fred Davies getting 7 years behind bars, Wael Hanna 8 years behind bars. So a lot has been going on here in federal court, Dick.
Christine Sloan live in Lower Manhattan. Christine, thank you. Former Senator Bob Menendez sentenced to 11 years in prison for bribery and extortion. This has been a breaking news special report. I'm Dick Brennan. Our coverage will continue streaming on CBSNewYork.com, the CBS News app, or on Pluto TV. We want to return you now to regular programming.
This has been breaking news.
Thank you for staying with us as we continue our special coverage on the sentencing of former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. Let's begin right now for a legal breakdown of this sentence, 11 years. Joining us now is Cheryl Bader, a law professor at Fordham University. First off, Professor, your reaction, 11 years, that's a little more than the defense wanted, a little less than the prosecution wanted.
Exactly. It's a significant sentence for a very significant crime. I think, the judge was very disturbed by how Senator Menendez wielded this great power, particularly on the Foreign Relations Committee. The judge was disturbed that he would compromise his interests and literally line his pockets and his boots with cash and gold bars. And I think the judge found it particularly egregious that he used the power to further aims of a foreign country above U.S. Foreign policy and providing confidential information and potentially risking the safety of diplomats and embassy officials. And although the defense attorneys, I thought, did a valiant, job of discussing, you know, his background, Senator Menendez's background as a Cuban refugee, long history of public service, letters of support, and just what is the purpose of a long incarceration going to do here? You have a man who's older and, you know, kind of pleading that he shouldn't have to die in prison. But, you know, although he did, Senator Menendez did also speak on his own behalf and pleaded with the judge for mercy, I think the judge was really struck by, you know, the significance of this and that there really wasn't remorse or acceptance of responsibility here, right? Senator Menendez has maintained his innocence and has not come forward and been reflective. And so I think, you know, the judge blamed him for his own fall from grace.
Professor, yeah, the words of the judge as we have it is, somewhere along the way, you lost your way. I don't know where. Somewhere along the way, you became a corrupt politician. Senator Menendez said, I am a chastened man. Every day I wake is a gut punch. I have 4 grandkids. He talked about all his deeds that he did throughout his career. And he was sobbing based on our reporting from Alice Skeiner. When that sentencing is going on, when the judge is listening to both sides, you would imagine that he's already predetermined what his sentence is going to be. Is there an idea that he listens to what the former senator says and says, maybe I'll make an adjustment here on the fly?
I think, you know, sometimes in those rare occasions you will see a judge being particularly impressed by what happens at the sentencing hearing. But remember, this isn't the first time that the judge is hearing most of this information, right? There's a pre-sentence report and lots of submissions that the judge has gone over. And so the judge is already informed of, you know, an informed decision for himself. And we saw actually in the earlier cases, right, we had Davies who has a child who has special needs. And, you know, the judges will often say, you know, you should have thought about your family and the impact that this is going to have before you committed the crime. And I think that's what the judge was saying here.
Yeah, there was such a dramatic exchange in court where Menendez said, I miss so many birthdays, I miss so many events for my kids. And essentially the judge comes back and says, you know, you should have thought of that. I mean, the prosecution said, hey, guess what? We could have had someone else there who was going to do the job and give up all that stuff and sacrifice for the people in New Jersey, but then not take all that money. How impactful, Professor Bader, is the fact that this was a very large amount of cash allegedly taken, and the word gold bars was being used, something that they even had pictures of. How impactful do you think that was to the jury in this case?
I think it was quite impactful. First of all, in the sentencing, of course, the amount of money plays a big part in the sentencing. But I think just, you know, here in terms of the evidence, I mean, this could have been, you know, out of a made-for-TV movie, right?
Yeah.
You have the visuals of the cash stuffed everywhere.
In his jacket, yeah.
Right, right. You know, everywhere throughout the house, right? The senator's wife asking for exercise equipment and air purifiers, like giving like a shopping list. You have gold bars, which I think is, you know, unusual in a case and gives this air of maybe this sinister kind of foreign intrigue. So I think a lot of this was quite a spectacle for the jury.
And in addition to the spectacle, I mean, it is pretty extraordinary. The charges involving getting bribes in connection with Egypt and Qatar, that is very serious stuff. And the judge did mention that when he was giving his sentence.
Absolutely. I think that was really weighed on the judge, thinking about how this man would sort of put his own greed before, you know, the nation's security, and that he had this position of power and was really willing to use his influence in ways that undercut foreign policy. And so I think that was something that that the judge wanted to give a significant deterrent sentence for.
Now, at one point, as I said, Menendez said, I'm a chastened man, but he never apologized in the sense of, yeah, I did it, you know, and I'd like to apologize because he's got to go and appeal right now. But what does that mean when he just gives that little bit that says, hey, I kind of understand I might have gone left or right or wrong? Was that just an appeal to the judge?
I think he's trying to sort of, you know, split the baby a little bit. But again, because he made a decision to go to trial, but also to maintain his innocence post-trial, he had to make a strategic choice. And although I think it's important for judges to hear remorse and acceptance of responsibility, and it's also something under the sentencing guidelines that will result in a slight reduction in the guideline sentence. But here, I think the senator made a strategic choice that he's going to appeal, he's going to maintain his innocence, and also remember his wife is also coming up for trial as well.
Yeah, her trial is coming up in March. I don't think we've gotten an indication from the courthouse as of yet as to whether or not he would. I know he asked for his sentence to be postponed, not only because of his wife's trial, but she has been battling cancer, and he said he wants to help her in that case. What are the next steps? A lot of people are saying, there have been so many corruption trials on politicians' cases in the U.S. where it's gone all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court has raised the bar to get a conviction and uphold a conviction. Do you see a possibility of real good grounds for appeal here?
So I definitely think we will see an appeal on those grounds. The Supreme Court, as you've said, has narrowed the laws to what constitutes public corruption. And the court has tried to justify that narrowing, saying that they don't want to capture conduct where officials are just being responsive to constituents and trying to help them with various matters. But it, of course, has made it much more difficult. The test that the Supreme Court has laid out has made it much more difficult for prosecutors to gain convictions and then to have those upheld. But I think here, even under this narrower definition, where an official has to have taken a specific official act and there has to be a direct quid pro quo, I think this is, you really have your sort of textbook case here of seeing that direct quid pro quo. And so I think it will withstand appeal. There are probably some other issues that we'll also see on appeal, but I'd be surprised if the case gets overturned.
Discussing the breaking news now, former Senator Bob Menendez sentenced to 11 years in prison for bribery and extortion charges. Professor, if you would stand by, we're going to go to Christine Sloan now, who's been in Lower Manhattan. And you haven't just been in Lower Manhattan covering this trial, Christine. You have known the former senator for many years, and I think you were also seeing the reporting that we're getting from Alice Gaynor of him sobbing in court. Knowing him personally as you do, did that surprise you?
No, it didn't surprise me. I've known him since 1995, and that is when I believe he became a U.S. congressman. No, it didn't surprise me because he has maintained that he is innocent, that basically he has told us that the government exaggerated the case, presenting these all of the cash that we saw, the gold bars to the jury. He believes that much of the work or whatever he was convicted of doing was in his job duty as a U.S. senator. So, no, I'm not surprised that he was crying. Alice was saying some of the things he said along the way, that I have lost everything that I have cared for, that every day being awake is a punch. And, of course, as you said, Dick, the judge said to him, look, somewhere along the way you became a corrupt politician. What's interesting is that back in the 1980s, former Senator Robert Menendez went and actually testified against a corrupt mayor in Union City. He had to wear a bulletproof vest to do that. So pretty extraordinary. And at that point in his career, he was considered a rising star in the Democratic Party. So today is certainly, as he said, a punch in the gut to him, Dick.
Yeah, and Christine, you know very well, he had a previous case in 2017 that ended in a hung jury, a corruption case. In fact, I believe the government's attorney brought that up and the judge shut him down and said that has nothing to do with this case, but it did have to do perhaps what's in the back of the mind of a judge who says, hey, this is not the first go-around. I know officially he can't comment on that, but when you look at both these cases and when you hear what you just said was somewhere along the way you lost your way, there's such a balance to this case in the sense that this was a man who did do a lot of good. The judge mentioned that. And yet, at the end, it was a spectacular fall. How do you put that all together? How do you characterize that, Christine?
You know, it's just really hard to comprehend this. Knowing him, you know, starting back in 1995, he was always a very reserved politician. He, you know, dotted his I's, crossed his T's, and, you know, as you said, the judge saying somewhere along the way he lost his way. I think that he truly, again, believes that he is innocent, that some of the things that he's been convicted of doing was just what he believes were part of his constituent services. And his attorneys have said that they're going to appeal this case. Now, the other question is that whether he would actually receive a pardon from President Donald Trump. Now, former Senator Menendez has been a very strong Democrat. He's worked for his constituents, as he said. He helped victims of Superstorm Sandy. I think that for him, and that's just my opinion, that's not having spoken to his attorneys or having spoken to him, for him, receiving a pardon, if it even would happen, would be a last resort. Because mind you, his son is a U.S. congressman covering Hudson County, a very Democratic stronghold. So this would not help his son's career. So again, you know, so much remains to be seen. His attorneys have said they are going to appeal this case, and we'll have to see where it goes. And again, if there was a pardon, I think it would definitely be a last resort, Dick.
And you mentioned before his daughter also, a news commentator, the son who I remember just, I guess it was about a few months, not even a year ago, months ago, was when he won his office again because he is in a Democratic stronghold. But I couldn't help but think in my mind what a day it might have been for the children in the courtroom, watching their father from a very early age being one of the, let's put in context just how powerful this man was, in charge of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That's one of the most powerful posts in all of U.S. government. And for them to see that today in court must have been heartbreaking, Christine.
Well, certainly, Dick, it was heartbreaking. We can tell you, and as you said, Alice Gaynor has been in court this entire time. She tells us that his daughter, who is a TV personality, along with his son, were in court with him. His sister was also there. Now, you know, as we've been reporting, he is the son of Cuban immigrants. His parents fled Fidel Castro's Cuba to come to this country for a better life. He described how he was the first in his family to go to college. So this is all gut-wrenching for his family. And of course, Congressman Robert Menendez Jr. has, wrote a letter to the judge saying, his dad deserves to spend time with his grandchildren. So we'll have to see if Menendez comes out here and addresses the media.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that the former senator, he had pleaded that he be allowed to defer his sentence from today so he could take care of his wife, and then there was her trial. But I hadn't heard any reporting whether that was the case. Can he defer his sentence right now, or do we not know that yet?
It's unclear at this point. Yeah. We can tell you that his wife's trial is scheduled for March. So it was delayed. They were supposed to, be on trial together along with Fred Davies and Wael Hana, but her trial was postponed because of a cancer diagnosis. So we're just going to have to wait and see exactly what happens on all of this, Dick. But I can tell you that, I did speak to him when I was in there. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial. So we'll have to see what the next move will be by his attorneys.
Senator Robert Menendez, former senator, sentenced to 11 years in prison for bribery and extortion. And I'm wondering if we could cut back to Professor Cheryl Bader from Fordham Law School, if she is still with us, and I will probably know in about 5 more seconds. No, she's not there. Oh, there she is. Okay. Professor Bader, I think you were listening to the conversation between Christine Sloan and I about the next steps. If you would now, just go over what are the next legal steps in this case.
Right. So they'll file for a notice of appeal, letting the higher court know that they're going to appeal the case, and then there'll be a scheduling of briefing. And so that will go to the Court of Appeals. And then the next level up is the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides if they want to take up that case. So that's what will happen. In the meantime, also and I didn't see in the reporting whether he was given the opportunity to surrender, but I'm assuming that he was, to surrender directly to the facility, which not all defendants are necessarily granted, but I'm assuming that he asked for it and he was granted that in this case. And so he would have to report, and I know you were mentioning and asking whether that, what the timing would be on that, and that's something that the judge will set. So I don't know whether he'll have the opportunity to be at his wife's trial. It depends on when his surrender date is. And
let me ask you, when you look at this case, what do you see as perhaps the most potent attempts for appeal? What do you think the various pieces of evidentiary challenges would go before the next appellate court?
Well, so I think one issue on appeal is going to be the issue that we were discussing in terms of how one defines public corruption and whether this really sort of fits in with that definition. Other issues around evidence, for instance, a mistrial was moved for by the defense because certain evidence that was introduced to the jury had been redacted, so certain lines were removed. But when the evidence was loaded onto a computer that the jury has during that deliberation process, certain redacted lines weren't, in fact, redacted in the version that went to the jury. And of course, that's a no-no. You can't have the jury looking at evidence that wasn't actually admitted into court. But there, the judge found that these lines, it was very insignificant, that the attorneys who had looked through all the documents before they were loaded onto the computer had not caught this. The jury deliberated for about 12 hours. They probably weren't going through every single document and combing it for every line that came in or didn't come in. And so the judge found that there really wasn't any reason for a mistrial, that there wasn't anything unfair about what had come in and was potentially before the jury. So I think that's something that we'll see appealed. And then there were various other evidentiary rulings, things that went on during the trial, and the judge's charge to the jury. So I think we'll see all of that come out on appeal.
And one thing people always ask is just how long can you delay your sentence based on appeal? We saw in many of the cases with President Trump, his lawyers, what some legal experts said, did a very good job in delay. And ultimately, that was a very unique case, and the cases sort of dropped off. But former senator, 71 years old, just how long could the appeals go on so he could stay out of jail? I know that's a tough question, but I'm sure that's a strategy, right?
Yes, and they may go on, and it is something that's up to the judge. In other words, the defense attorneys can ask that he be free during the appeal process, and that will be a decision that is left up to the judge. I would assume that the prosecutor will oppose that, but maybe because of these circumstances, again, because his wife is undergoing treatment for cancer, because she'll be on trial, it may be that the judge does allow him to remain free on appeal.
Yeah.
A lot of it depends also on sort of the judge's decision around, the strength of the issues on appeal, and also whether, this person is going to, kind of flee the jurisdiction, et cetera. So these are things that the judge will consider.
And Professor, you hear this in just about every case that it applies, but the former senator said, hey, I was just doing my job. When I was talking to the people, the connections from Qatar and from Egypt, I was just doing my job. And it's a very fair point on his part. What makes the difference of I was just doing my job and no, you're guilty of corruption? He has to talk to a lot of people. He has to hear a lot of what their complaints are and what he can do for them. And I think you've talked about there has to be a real quid pro quo, right?
Yes, and also remember, this is an issue for the jury. And so the jury has spoken here. So I think an appellate court isn't going to want to substitute their judgment for the judgment of the jury, right? And it's a hard job for the jury to discern what was the intent. Was there a corrupt intent, right? Was this person just doing what they otherwise would do? Or were they taking these actions to line their own pocket because of their own greed. And so the jury, hearing all the evidence, and that was what, Menendez was arguing during his trial, was that he was, meeting with people and talking to people, and he would have taken these actions in any event, that this was just part of what him doing his job as a public servant. But the jury found otherwise. Yeah, and then there was some talk in the back and forth in court today of whether if he got less than 10 years or more than 10 years, and would it be a high security prison or a low security prison. Does that stuff really, I'd never really heard that before, that comes into sentencing, okay? It'll depend on where he winds up, depending on his age, his health, et cetera? Yes, so if somebody is going to be sentenced and they know they're going to be sentenced to a term of incarceration, often where they're going to be becomes sort of one of the bigger issues for them, right? Often it's a matter of also where you're going to be location-wise, right? Because if you want friends, family to be able to visit you, right, the location where you're sent, and it's a federal, right, you can be sent to any federal prison. And so, requesting, certain facilities, judges often don't want to be the one to sort of hamstring the Bureau of Prisons on that. But here, the amount of time he was given would be a determinant factor. And so they were asking the judge to sentence him so that he could in some ways be weighing in on where he was housed. Professor Bader, if you could stand by once again, I would like to go back to Christine Sloan. Christine, you've been hearing the conversation between myself and the professor, and I can't help but feel, and I know you can feel this way too, because you've covered a lot of these politicians, and everybody always says the same thing. How could they possibly thought that they could get away with this, especially the really graphic evidence of the gold bars and the cash? Having known this man, do you ever say to yourself, hey, what could he have been thinking? It's all baffling, and a lot of people who are close to him, sources that I speak to, they don't understand it either. Somehow along the way, after the pandemic, after he proposed to his wife, something went awry. So it's so unclear to so many of us. Now, going back to, what you were talking about on the bail, Wael Hana's attorney has said that they are filing an appeal next Friday and that they will ask for bail pending that appeal. And I'm assuming that is exactly what Menendez's attorney will do. So that might keep him out some more, for extra time, perhaps allowing him to attend his wife's trial. So, but at this point, again, all of it unclear, and we're just guessing. And speaking of guessing, you haven't seen him that much up close, except walking back and forth. I think you saw him in court a few times. What is your view? And he's 71 years old. This is obviously a crushing experience. Does he look like a man who's still in good health? Because I know even his attorneys were saying, hey, Judge, if this guy gets a 15-year sentence, that's a potential life sentence for a man who's 71 years old. What's your sense about his health just by looking at him? It's hard to say by looking at him, but I do know that he's not the man that I knew, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. He's a broken man. He says it. And in court, so many days when he would be in the hallway just to cope with what was going on, he would sing. He's got an extremely great voice, and he would sing in the hallways just to get rid of the stress that he was dealing with. And, his friends say that's a coping mechanism for him. So in terms of his health, I don't know, but I do know that he's told me that, he's crushed. It's overwhelming. I keep thinking about what he said in court to the judge. Every day that he wakes up is a punch. Yeah. So he's going through a lot at this point, and we are expecting him. And again, as we've been saying, Alice Gaynor's been doing an extraordinary job inside federal court. She's been inside that courtroom. We're expecting him to come out here, and I'm not even sure if he's at the podium right now. But, I do speak to him. He does speak to me. Going into court today, I tripped, I caught on to him. He was a gentleman, held on to me.
but it's a very difficult situation for him and his entire family. Now, you know, Alice Gaynor has made her way out of that courtroom, and we're hoping to get her to come talk to us right now. She's had some great insight. She has been taking diligent notes, describing every moment of what went on. And oh, here comes Alice right now. Alice, as she puts on her microphone, I'm going to tell you that she was in there for all three sentencing. Hey, what a great job that you've been doing inside there.
Oh,
Describe that moment when the judge sentenced him to the 11 years.
So I got to tell you, it was kind of anticlimactic, and what I mean by that is here you had the defense arguing, we want something that is no more than 8 years. The government wanted 15 years. The judge decided, I'm going to go below the sentencing guidelines and I'm going to sentence you to 11 years. So considering what his attorneys were asking for, this was greater than that. You had his son, his daughter, his sister sitting in the front row along with 3 other people. That first row behind the defense table is reserved for his friends, his family. I didn't see a reaction from anyone. And I was looking at his son, I was looking at his daughter because he referenced them a few times. You know, he was essentially pleading his case for a lighter sentence from the judge, and he was crying, Christine. I mean, we saw 3 defendants in this case sentenced today. 2 of them cried. One of them did not. Fred Davies was up there crying a lot this morning. You also had former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez crying. I mean, the judge told him, take your time. He was hunched over. And somebody had turned to me and asked, do you think those tears are real? I mean, he had a hard time holding it together, but I did not see that spark any reaction from his son or daughter. I'm sure they prepared themselves for today. At one point, Menendez's sister looked like she might have been shaking a little, so I don't know if she was possibly crying, but he doesn't have to surrender until it sounds like June. So he's going to be walking out of here. You know, the judge granted him that later surrender because his wife, Nadine Menendez, is battling breast cancer, as we know, and he said he wanted to be there to assist her. The judge wants him available for her trial, which is the next trial to get underway. In this case, she is one of the defendants in this case. So he's going to be walking out of this courthouse. And I just jumped in and heard you mentioning before when you were face to face with him, but he really didn't say much.
No, he's not speaking. He knows that these moments are very important leading up to that appeal that his attorneys have said they're going to file an appeal. What I found really striking, Alice, was that when he addressed the judge and he talked about the regrets in his life, saying that the state of New Jersey, as you told us, was his compensation, that he regretted not spending enough time with his son and daughter. Of course, those are regrets so many of us have in our lives, but what was that moment like when he was talking about that?
So I looked right at his son and daughter. So I was sitting 2 rows behind his son and daughter, and I looked right away at them thinking maybe that was going to, you know, evoke some kind of emotion from them, but they were stone-faced. He said, you know, he was making the plea to the judge. He's dedicated his life, he says, to service to his constituents, and as a result, it was all-consuming, and he regretted that came at the expense of time with his children. He said he missed some really pivotal moments, and it was interesting because you're hearing him talk about all these things he did for people in New Jersey. A lot of members of the public wrote letters on his behalf, mentioning times that he brought organ donors from other countries, relatives of people here who desperately needed, you know, a bone marrow transplant. Someone needed a kidney transplant. So he's talking about all these good things he did, and then it was as if the government snapped us back to reality because they said, well, that's your job. That's what you're elected to do. You know, you being elected senator was a real privilege, and a lot of people would have loved to have had that position and been voted into that position. So that's great you did these good things. You were supposed to do these good things on behalf of the people of New Jersey. And Christine, I just have to point out, you know what we didn't hear today? We didn't hear any apologies because, as you mentioned, the defendants, they're all appealing. So they're not going to go up there and apologize for any misconduct, anything they've been convicted of, because they don't believe they did anything wrong. In fact, one of the defendants this morning told the judge, I am an innocent man. So we didn't hear any apologies. We did see some tears, hear some tears, and they talked about regrets, but no apologies for what they were convicted of.
Yeah, no, all of these attorneys in the case have said that this case was based on speculation, presenting the jury with extraordinary amounts of cash and gold bars. And the senator throughout this trial, you know, speaking to him, has maintained his innocence, saying that, you know, the jury got it wrong. wrong. And so as this appeal, as they begin the process of the appeal, I would imagine it's not a good time to talk about anything, you know, on the record, except what he talked about in court, you know, what he was feeling emotionally about this moment.
I'd say the closest thing we got to an admission of guilt was when Mr. Menendez's former Senator Menendez's attorney got up there and said, Judge, you need to look at the arc of his life. There are some good things and there are some missteps.
Yes.
You know, there are some moments where he's fallen, but he never quite said, yes, he did all of this. And as it relates to those gold bars and all of that cash, the judge pointed out that former Senator Menendez doesn't have the means that the other two defendants have.
Yes.
They still have a lot of cash. So he was not going to fine Senator Bob Menendez here, and all of the cash that was found in his home that was stashed away, those gold bars, that has now been forfeited to the U.S. government, but no fine other than that. And also what was found in a safe deposit box in his wife Nadine's name.
You know, I think Dick has a question. Dick, you have a question for Alice?
And I don't have my IFB in.
That's okay.
All right, well, my question is, and Christine, if you could relay it, I would appreciate it. Alice, while she was sitting in court there, and watching former Senator Menendez literally sob in front of him and give his life story, what was the demeanor of the judge? Was it like, hey, I'm not buying this stuff? How did you see the judge reacting to him?
So, Alice, Dick is asking, as the former senator was in court sobbing, what was the judge's reaction? Like,
the judge was really pretty stone-faced, a poker face, I suspect. Now, the judge, of course, you know, he was asked, have some compassion, is what Mr. Menendez's attorney had said to the judge, you know, and again, look at all these good deeds and all the other things he's done in his life. And the judge did mention, yes, you've done some good, but I don't know where you went wrong, and called him at some point, said, you became a corrupt politician. So the judge was listening to all this. He said he read all of the letters that were sent from members of the public. His daughter sent a letter detailing Mr. Menendez's background. I mean, because he had quite a tremendous uprising from, you know, these humble beginnings and really rose to power, which the judge acknowledged, but said, you know, it's somewhere, I don't know where, you know, you went wrong.
It's an interesting career, like a rising star in the Democratic Party, starting on a school board, going to become a state senator, an assemblyman, and then becoming a congressman, and then, you know, going to the U.S. Senate, chairing the Foreign Relations Committee. All of this, an extraordinary career. And as you said, the judge just saying, you know, somewhere along the way, you became a corrupt politician. What else can you tell us about, you know, were there other people in the courtroom? I know it's hard to tell who they are, but
Sure.
Was there a large group of people there to support him other than his daughter?
We just want to interrupt because we understand
it was a
that
packed courtroom. Obviously, a lot of the rows were reserved for journalists. Is there something happening?
We got it, yes. So
This whole process has been done
former Senator Menendez is talking. Let's listen in.
by the Justice Department's NSD and prosecutors who are more interested in political scouts than preparing to run for public office, like Daniel Williams. Only in the Southern District of New York could prosecutors send the jury illegal evidence that violates the judge's order and the Constitution's speech and debate clause. Have no accountability as to who or how or what happened. Claim that it was critical evidence when they were trying to convince the judge not once but twice that this was critical evidence, and then suggest that after they were caught that in fact it was unimportant. That's outrageous, and unbelievable. Only in the SDNY could you embrace an FBI agent who was caught lying on the stand in order to make their case. Only in the Southern District of New York would prosecutors allow a witness to walk away from over 10 criminal charges, including defrauding the United States government, so that they can get him to lie on the stand. Welcome to the Southern District of New York, the Wild West of political prosecutions. President Trump is right. This process is political and it's corrupted to the core. I hope President Trump cleans up the cesspool and restores the integrity to the system.
How is this political? You're a Democrat.
Former Senator Bob Menendez taking a very different tone from the tone he took in court, where he sobbed and essentially asked for mercy. But here he took on the Southern District of New York, called his prosecution political, even went so far at the end to suggest that he hopes President Trump is listening. There has been speculation that he is hoping from a pardon from President Trump, but that is speculation at this point. But you got a little bit of a sense of his appeal that is coming up soon. We understand that he will not have to report immediately to serve his 11-year sentence for bribery and extortion. He will have till at least perhaps June, after the trial of his wife begins, and then we shall see where the appeal goes from there. But you certainly got a sense of a very different, there we saw the fighting former Senator Robert Menendez tipping off what his appeal will be like, and also sounding a lot like some other politicians, talking in terms of political prosecutions from the Southern District of New York. This has been a special breaking news broadcast. I'm Dick Brennan. We'll have continuing coverage and a breakdown of what happens next coming up on CBS News New York at 5. For updates anytime, go to cbsnewyork.com.
This has been breaking news.